Throughout life, there is going to be a person that you always look up to. This person that I look up to, my role model, my hero, my Papaw, James Glenn Askins, born August 15th, 1936. My grandfather, he was growing up in a family with his mother and father and two sisters in a little farmhouse in Middle Tennessee. Not a lot of money back then. My grandfather's father, he worked at the sawmill, making very little money, doing what he could to provide for his family and to make ends meet. Of course, it was back during a depression. Not a lot of jobs were to be found. My grandfather, he learned the value of a dollar very quickly growing up. He also, as a child, would go down to the sawmill and help his father out as he got older. Around 11, 12 years old, he would go down and he'd help his father out so he could make extra money to go to the store, and he would be able to buy candy or a soda pop, rather a RC cola and a moon pie, as he put it. That was his favorite thing to do as a child. And of course, being the only boy growing up with two sisters was very tough. But the childhood struggles, the clothes that he wore were mostly hand-me-downs from nephews that were older than him, or very cheap clothes that his mom made and sewed from patterns that she would pick up from the local store downtown. And as my grandfather put it, as a kid going to school, which back then the school was just one room, and it was one teacher, and of course she had a ruler. If you got out of the way, she'd smack you across the hands with it, is what he would tell me. But he dealt with it, and it taught him to work hard and strive to be more than he was. And with that, he went into the army because he wanted to do something different. He wanted to be more than some poor farm boy. So he joined the army, and later on, he married my grandmother, Frances Askins, and they shipped him off. He actually was away from his family, went to Alaska, and when he was in Alaska, and my grandmother, they stayed down in Tennessee. And they had three kids, my mom, my aunt, and my uncle. And he only made $36 a month. So that's not a lot of money, going through the army and trying to provide for your family to become a better man. And in the middle of his enlistment in the army, he went to Vietnam. And my grandfather, he is an aerial gunner and a flight engineer on helicopters while he was in Vietnam. He was there for a year. Luckily, he survived. And he also went on, he got done with Vietnam, he came home, and he was put in to be a recruiter. And my grandfather, during his time, he was the #1 Army recruiter in the whole nation, the whole United States at one point in time. I actually found a magazine, the Army Times magazine, up in my grandfather's attic, and it was Army Times, and it had my grandfather's name and an article about my grandfather being the #1 recruiter throughout the whole nation in the Army. So that was pretty cool. This part's tough. My grandfather, he fought cancer for probably about 3 or 4 years. And he always had a positive attitude. he always, no matter what, would never give up. And no matter how bad it get, and no matter how bad he hurt, he kept a positive attitude and he kept fighting cancer. It started out as melanoma cancer on his back, and he went to the doctor. They removed the mole from his back, and they thought they got it all, and they didn't. And it transferred into his lungs, and then of course it got in his lymph nodes, and from there it transferred to his brain. And my grandfather, even though it got into his brain, he still had recollection and he knew what was going on. And my grandmother called me one day. This was on February 5th, 2009. She called me. She said, "Chris, you need to come home because your grandfather's fixing to pass away." So I drove for 7 hours from Savannah, Georgia to Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I got there, and my grandfather, he sat in his recliner, and we were talking, and he still had his mind, and he still positive attitude, telling jokes like he always does. Just a beautiful, beautiful man. And he told me, he said, "Son, I'm glad